Hello, everyone. I'm very glad that you're here. My name is Adam Robinski. I come from Poland. I used to say that I'm a journalist slash writer, but now I'm more of a writer, and sometimes I work as a journalist as well. This lecture was supposed to be in Polish, translated into French, but there were some problems with getting an interpreter, so I'm going to keep on talking in English, and you'll have to excuse my errors and mistakes, because this is not my native language, but I'll do my best. So this is the only picture you will see today, this map. I was going to show more, but then I realized that I'm not that good doing PowerPoint presentations, and that's not what writers do. Writers are supposed to write. But I wanted to show this map because it's important. It's kind of an introduction, and you'll see why. All right, so the title of the lecture was supposed to be An Alien Familiar Landscapes, and I will talk a lot about landscapes. I am considered probably a nature writer, and I don't like the term. I think the term landscape is much better, because what I write about are the relations between people and landscapes, between people who inhabit landscapes, and the relations that form between humans and the land. And my Polish friend, poet Michał Książek, in one of his poems, he wrote that cartography is the fourth literary genre, alongside epic, lyric, and drama. And I agree with him, and that's why I like to start, when I write books, I really want them to start with a map. So this map that you see here comes from my book Kiczery. It's about the Bieszczady Mountains. Bieszczady is a part of the Carpathians, of the long chain that goes through half of Europe. It starts somewhere in Austria, then goes through Czechia, Slovakia, Poland, Ukraine, Romania. Some of it is in Serbia, I guess. So it's a very large chain of mountains, and Bieszczady is a small part of it. It lies on the border between Poland, Ukraine, and Slovakia. It's a place where three countries meet, a bit like here. I mean, the heights are also very similar. The forests are similar, but the history of the place is different, because the uniqueness of Bieszczady doesn't come from what's there, but it comes from what's missing, what's not there, but should be. Because it's a place where a lot of history in the 20th century happened. I mean, the Second World War and its consequences for that part of Europe. So this place used to be a melting pot. A lot of different nationalities lived there: Poles, Jews, Ukrainians, and the locals that now we call Łemkos or Ruthenians. And as a result of persecutions and resettlements, after the Second World War, the area is completely deserted. Everyone left there. Everyone who didn't speak Polish was resettled to other parts of Poland, because the communist authorities of Poland wanted to make this place exactly this monocultural space. And when people disappear from landscape, it's not only like their bodies. It's a lot more, because their traditions disappear, their plans, their goals, their dreams, their desires, and the land becomes empty. The land becomes untold. There are no stories told in the place. And I think our world doesn't accept such thing as no story of a place. It doesn't accept vacuum. So if there is no story, a new story must be invented, must be told. And that's what happened in Bieszczady, because it was a place where a lot of trees grew, so they were all cut down, so Poland could start being rebuilt from ruins. Poland needed the trees and needed people who would cut down the trees. They needed people who would build factories. So a lot of new people went there after the war, and they brought their new stories, their plans, their dreams, and they started to invent the new stories of the place. So some of them were grotesque, some of them were ridiculous, some of them were serious. Bieszczady became kind of Polish Patagonia because it's a place at the very end of the country, at the very south, and it became a land of outcasts, a last stop before terra incognita, a land of refugees. A land of people who went there were those that couldn't put down their roots anywhere else. And so I found a similarity between this part of the world and the southern tip of South America, which Bruce Chatwin described in his famous In Patagonia book, and I decided to tell about Bieszczady as if it was our own version of Patagonia. So my book began with a map. This is the map. There are some real toponyms here. There are some drawings. I don't need you to read them because they are not that good visible. But what's important about the map is that it looks normal, kind of. I see that it's a little bit like from a Winnie the Pooh, but yeah, but it's a map of real place with some drawings. But when you watch the map, you have to be careful. On the surface, everything is in order, but actually, this map is opposite of the normal one. You can see it in the directions that south is up, north is down, west is on the right, and east is on the left. So exactly opposite as than it should be. And so from me as a writer, it was a signal that you have to be careful because you're entering the land of illusion, a land of myth, a land that might lie to you, that might tell some untrue stories. But to my surprise, the readers didn't notice it. Everyone saw that it's just a regular map. They just saw it and then turned the paper and didn't realize that this is very important for the text. It's almost a chapter of the book. And it became a signal for me that we get so used to some things that we don't look at them too serious, that we don't, we've gotten used and we become half blind for some obvious things. And this is because we are so used to the perspective that we have that we are not attentive enough anymore. So yes, there's a lot to be said about the perspective. Travel is a big part of my books because when I write about landscapes, I have to usually travel to see them. And when you talk about travel writing, there is one French name that often comes up. It's this 18th century French writer, pardon my French, Javier de Maistre, who in 1794 he described expeditions around his own bedroom. The title of the book was Voyage à tour de ma chambre, and it was written during his days of house arrest. He was supposed to spend like a month or longer at his home. It was a punishment, something like we did during the COVID pandemic. And then he described it as a kind of expedition. He went through the bedroom and wrote about what he sees: a chair, a desk, a bed. Of course, then he started. He lost the commitment. He started writing about other things, but the idea was there that everyone has the right to become a discoverer. Everyone can be a great discoverer. And I will quote you a small bit from the book. Will even the laziest not hesitate to follow me, to experience pleasure that will cause them no trouble and will cost them nothing? So take courage, let us go. We will go slowly, laughing as we go at those who have seen Paris or Rome. Nothing will stop us. Listening to our imagination, we will go wherever it has the whim to lead us. If we're talking about landscapes, we have to ask ourselves what is the landscape. And there is this very useful definition by American academic John R. Stilgoe. He teaches at Harvard, and he deals with landscapes in his work. So he points out that the English word landscape comes from the Old Frisian, and it consists of two words, land and shovel. So landscape is space dug up, a space processed, changed by humans over the centuries. And the opposite of landscape is wilderness, glaciers, oceans, some part of tropical forests or deserts. But there's also different kind of wilderness, the one that we can make ourselves. Imagine a situation that it's winter, it's dark, you're driving to some very secluded place, and then suddenly your car breaks, and it won't go further, and the battery in your phone is dead, or you have no signal, and you feel like you don't have control of the situation. So the situation is kind of wild. This is you feel like you were in a wild place. This is a wilderness that you do to yourself, because the observator, the person who watches, is a very important part of the landscape. We are also part of the landscape, and it's in Polish the word landscape is krajobraz. It consists of two parts: kraj, which is country, and obraz, which is image. So it suggests that it's only about what we see, but it's not true. There are elements of other senses in landscapes: sounds, smells, the wind that you feel on your cheek, or the berries you pick up in the forest. The taste of the berries is also part of the landscape. So the perspective that you choose is crucial for how you describe the landscape. And the moment you change your perspective, the landscape changes. So according to John R. Stilgoe, who I mentioned before, there was this one big moment in history of mankind that changed everything for us. And it was 1783 in France, when the first manned balloon flights took place. For the first time, humans saw the Earth from the perspective of the bird, because the balloon didn't need any work from people piloting it, so they could just watch. And they saw the land as it is from the bird's perspective. They saw the rivers as a whole, not just one meander of the river, but a long stretch of water coming from one point to the other. They saw forest as not just single trees, but as just big green spaces that could be defined, that had a beginning, had an end. So the forests were not, the land was no longer measured by how many days you need to travel through it, but you could just encompass it in one glance. And this changed everything for humans. Some of them say that it brought us ruin, because, for example, American philosopher David Abram, he says that we no longer consider a river to be something here and now. We don't think, when we think of river, we don't think of Vistula, Oder, Rhine, Rhone, or Danube, but there's this indefinite anonymous stream of water that meets the requirements of encyclopedic definition. So we are disconnected from the land because we treat it as an abstract and not as a real thing. So I met a British paraglider once who was traveling from Siberia to the UK, and she was following the route of geese, not geese, but swans. of black big swans. It's called Bewick's swan. It's a bird that winters in Great Britain, but breeds in deep Siberia because these are very fertile lands for migrating birds. So the paraglider was trying to talk to the public about the swans and the dangers that come with this migration, and she followed the route with them with the paraglider. I was talking to them to her in Biebrza. Biebrza is the biggest national park in Poland. It's like one of the last rivers, wild rivers that are free to do whatever they want. So Biebrza has this large flood plains, and every spring there is no river. There's like this big amount of water everywhere. There are a lot of birds because birds love such landscapes. So I talked there to her, and so I mean the expedition was very interesting for me. But I wanted to ask her what she saw when she flew over the Siberian tundra, because this is landscape we don't normally see from the birds. Okay, you can check it on Google Maps, but the quality of the pictures isn't great. And she saw it with her own eyes. So she said that there were no straight lines there, and the colors changed like in the kaleidoscope. And from the aviator points of view, it's a big challenge, because if there are no trees and the colors are constantly changing, how can you tell which terrain is suitable for landing? What is dry and what is wet? The only thing you can do in this situation is to fly low and see what it looks like from smaller distance. Bright orange definitely means wet, where you don't land. Anything that resembles a football pitch is not only wet, but probably a meter deep. Or purple, sometimes it's nice, dry heather, and sometimes a large meadow where you can land, but you definitely can't take off for further flight. There is a name for an extreme example of this bird's eye perspective. It's called the overview effect. The term was coined by a British writer, Frank White, and he wrote a book of the same title, The Overview Effect, and it's the effect of seeing our planet from the orbit, because our planet from the orbit is a very fragile thing. You can hide it under your thumb, and it disappears. So when you see it from this perspective, then it is said that everything on its surface becomes trivial. And this is probably why the astronauts are the most ardent of environmentalists, because they start caring about this small fragile thing that can be hidden under their thumb. Since I've already drifted to space, let me refer to the work of wonderful Bavarian director Werner Herzog, who is a big inspiration for me. In one of his films, the film is called Lessons of Darkness in English. So in this film, he pretends that the burning oil fields of Kuwait are not really Middle East at all. It's not even our planet. It's some other planet in the solar space. And he even called it an uninhabitable planet. So I think each of us at some point of their lives dreamed of being an astronaut. I still dream myself that one of my kids might become an astronaut. But if Javier de Maistre could have talked about his bedroom as if it were Champs-Élysées or Rome, why don't we seek alien, otherworldly experiences in the places that we already know? And I think that literature is a great place to do it, because it works with imagination even in an even more successful way than film does, because the reader draws the pictures themselves, and the writer has to work with the reader's imagination. So there's this word alien that brings to mind extraterrestrial life, but here on Earth, life comes in countless forms, and only one of them I mean ourselves, is not alien to us. Everything is alien to us except ourselves. So let's take mammals, bats. Bats with their echolocation as a form of seeing the world, it's an astonishing thing. It really is difficult for us to even imagine how the bat sees the world, because echolocation is about shouting and getting a response from the echo. So a bat shouts, the wave, the sound wave, ultrasonic sound wave that we don't hear, but they do. It just bounces off the wall or the tree, the building, and gets back to the bat, and the bat decides what to do according to the information it got. So at first glance, it seems easy, but then you have to imagine how many obstacles it has to pass before this way of seeing the world, of interacting with the world, becomes a good way to live. Because, for example, the bat needs to shout constantly. Like every second, it shouts multiple times. So how not to go deaf from getting the echo all the time? So a bat has this organ in their ear that contracts the muscles of the ear at the moment it shouts, and it helps them not to go deaf. But there are other problems. For example, a single echo is like a freeze frame, but you can't tell about the world, you can't behave in the world just by basing on the freeze frames. You have to get more of these images. So you have to keep on shouting all the time. And how do you echolocate in the crowd? Because the bats are not single animals. They usually hunt in groups. So how do you recognize your own echo and not your friends who's flying next to you? How do you pick out a noisy object from the even noisier background? How to paint the entire world from all those signals? This is like this big pile of problems for this animal, and they are successful with dealing with it. And this may be surprising for you, but there are people, humans, who can echolocate. They were born blind, or they lost their sight when they were very young, for example, due to illness. And they use other senses, primarily hearing, to get ability to be able to live in our world, and our world depends on sight. So using other senses is difficult. But so one of them is called David Kish. He's American, and he's been echolocating since he was a few years old because he lost his eyes due to cancer. So if you look him up on the internet, you will find the films of a guy who's walking and clicking like this. And he gets the echo, he hears the echo, and he can like walk through the park without hitting a tree. So he's making decisions based on his own echo. And it's a legitimate form of echolocation. So in one of his interviews, he was asked, I think this is the question that everyone would ask. So how does a human look from the perspective of a bat? And this is what he said. Echo-wise, people basically look like indistinct blobs. You get the general shape or height, but people give you a sense of presence. So even if we're moving in a crowded place, it's not really a problem to follow them. Yeah, but we're just like indistinct blobs for the bats. Perhaps imagining how an echolocating creature sees a world is beyond our cognitive abilities, but some people, some writers, try to go even further. Ursula K. Le Guin comes to mind. She was an author with an incredible imagination who was able to conjure up incredible worlds, detailed worlds out of nothing, whether in fantasy genre or science fiction. So in one of the collections of her stories, she presents an account, let me quote you, of a failed revolution in an anthill. The source of the message is clumsily translated signs from the glandular secretions of ants left of acacia seeds. Reading grain by grain of the seeds, Le Guin plays a game of telephone. She interprets each of the messages, and she asks questions. What did the ant mean? How to understand the loneliness of an ant if such a state does not exist if ants experience? What is the motive of the wingless worker who calls for the queen to be raised up? Does the symbolism of raising up, of this direction up, that is clear to humans, does the symbolism apply in this case as well? Perhaps for ants, going up means something worse. It's a call to revolt. So this may all seem funny, but as writes Le Guin, as recently as in mid-20th century, most scientists and many artists did not even believe that dolphin speech was something worth understanding. So maybe in the next century, these questions about communicating with ants will seem just as funny. And so there are many attempts to give subjectivity to other beings in literature. And they are not funny, they are very serious. Let's talk about British writer Roger Deakin for a moment. He wrote this quite famous in the UK book, Waterlog, in which he described his country from the perspective of a frog. So this is a serious non-fiction literature. He's writing about his own homeland, but the perspective of a frog is the one that he chooses. And so how does the frog see the world? First of all, you have to jump into every puddle that you come across, and that's what he does. So his book is subtitled A Swimmer's Journey Through Britain, but he himself admitted that it's all about being a frog. And so it's the situation where only your head sticks up from the water, and you don't really know what's around the bend or how long this river is. So it's like you were trying to forget the bird's eye perspective that is imprinted in our heads, has been imprinted in our heads for a couple of centuries. He tries to not to see the world as a whole, but to see just the part of it. And he tries to tell us what the river really is. So it's not this blue stripe on the map, but it's duckweed on the water, it's kingfishers, herons hunting for fish, willow thickets growing on the banks, or beaver lodges hidden in the reeds. Yes, and that's how I got to beavers. For me, sooner or later, it always comes to beavers. Imagine my surprise when one of my first conversations here at the foundation turned out to be about beavers, and I didn't even start it. Someone else started talking about beavers, and I just joined in. I wrote a book about beavers in 2022. It's called The Palaces on Water, and it's the story about the resurrection of the species in Europe, because it's a great reintroduction success. There was a time where there were beavers everywhere in Europe, and then they almost disappeared, and now they're coming back. And if you look at the map of our continent, you'll quickly realize that almost every country in Western, Central, or Eastern Europe is full of local names referring to beavers. In Germany, is all those names with beaver. In the name in Poland, we have plenty of bobrówka, bobrówek. Bóbr is beaver in Polish. It's the same in the UK. But 70 or 80 years ago, the beaver was a species on the verge of extinction in most of Europe. But these place names are much older than this. They go back to Middle Ages and the times where there was abundance of beavers. They were everywhere, and they were hunted. They started to be hunted, and their ecosystem started to be drained. So beaver habitats started to disappear. Yeah, but they used to be everywhere, and most scientists even agree that between the last glaciation and the expansion of Homo sapiens, it were the beavers that were the main force that shaped the landscape on the continental scale throughout the whole northern hemisphere, and that they created the foundation of space that humans later build up with their towns and villages. There's this British archaeologist, she's called Bryony Nichols, and she claims that even 4,000 years ago, beavers still had a greater influence on shaping space than humans, because humans, they still used stone-made tools and they hid in caves, and at the same time beavers cut down trees, they changed the species composition of forests, they dammed streams, they built marshes, they modified the boundaries of watershed. So everything that early hominids managed to achieve was also within the reach of an average beaver family, however it sounds. Humans learned from them how to dig irrigation canals, how to dam water, how to pollen trees, and over time, both species began to perform the same things, same activities, using similar tools. And this might be shocking, but this is a quote from an archaeologist, that in archaeological records, the achievements of early humans are sometimes confused with the work of a rodent. So I did a quick reconnaissance about beavers in Switzerland, and on the tourist organization's website, I found that there are 1,600 of them. That's possible, but I learned not to believe such numbers because it's very difficult to count the population of an animal. We have some ways to do it, but they are not excellent. So I'm not sure how many beavers are there in Switzerland. The fact is that they tend to stick to the lower parts of the country. But then, to my great surprise, I found a trace of a beaver high in the Alps, because it turns out that one of the peaks near Dufourspitze, on the ridge between Switzerland and Italy, is called Castor. And Castor Fiber is a Latin name for beaver, and I would really love to know the history of this place name. How the hell did the beaver get there? Who invented the name? Anyway, my book about beavers is an attempt to countermap Poland. Countermap, that is, to draw an alternative map of space. A map in which the most important place would not be Warsaw, the capital of 2 million people, not the Vistula, the biggest river, not the highest peak in the Tatra Mountains, which is not that high comparing to the Alps. So the most important point on this map would be this anonymous wetland in northeastern Poland, where in 1951, a first beaver family was discovered after the Second World War. And so from this wetland, the beavers started spreading throughout, started migrating and started colonizing Poland again. Or another wetland, which is like this big metropolis of beavers, where plenty of families there, and it looks like a bit like New York made out of beaver lodges. Is this swamp called całowanie, and całowanie is a very special word in Polish because całowanie means kissing. So at first it's hard to imagine a stranger toponym for a wetland, but let me explain it to you. If you walk on a mud or in a wetland, but let's say you walk on the mud in your rain boots. So the ground does this strange sound, a kind of cluck, an elongated suction. In Polish, we would say cmok. And cmoknąć means to give a short kiss. So the next time you walk on in deep mud and you hear the sound, just imagine that it's the planet kissing your feet. So yeah, this is the moment I will ask you to listen to a short fragment of my own writing, something that might illustrate, something that might transport you to this wetland. None of my books have been translated into English yet, So this is my own translation. It's not perfect, but I hope you'll find it interesting. I will now tell you about a city that has an astonishing peculiarity. It is completely invisible. It was built on a marshy, untamed terrain, hospitable rather to winged and aquatic creatures than to land creatures. The sky hangs over it white, more often cloudy than sunny, which is an inherent feature of all settlements near this latitude. Sometimes the northwesterly wind blows heads off here. Other times there is a loud silence. So this is how the chapter on całowanie, the kissing, could begin if Italo Calvino had written it and then place it among other fairy tale metropolises, Zenobia, Fedora, Pyrrha, or Olindia, which in his book Marco Polo tells about Kublai Khan. However, an Italian would certainly not have come up with such a sensual name for it. So the toponymy makes it impossible to pass by kissing indifferently. A place that someone once gave such a name cannot be just any place. And if at first glance it seems trivial, it means that learning about these intentions require a lot of patience. This was my conviction when I visited it for the first time. It was a long time ago, on a February or early March morning between two seasons. Winter had passed, spring was late. It was gray and gloomy, as if someone had suddenly copied November on tracing paper. I wandered through exceptionally dry meadows, a bit blindly, not knowing where to rest my eyes. It was too early for birds. So, sure, somewhere in the withered willow I caught a crane in my binoculars. However, I was overcome by an overwhelming sense of loneliness and emptiness. Someone had kissed the swamp goodnight and had not yet time to wake it up. On the border coming out of the alder forest, I saw a fox. It was very red and very dead. I crouched over to analyze its anatomy, inch by inch. They say foxes are great at faking death, but this one was a complete corpse. Its intestines were sliding through the grass like an earthworm. It looked like someone had tried to tie a knot in it. Its head was under its rump, its gray belly on top. An eye was peering out from between its paws. "What are you going to do with me?" it said to me. I did nothing. The carcass was in its place, waiting for the worms to take care of it. I concluded that it was the victim of a road accident. The perpetrator had clearly found enough empathy to grab the fox by its hind legs, carry it off the road, and then throw it like a discus thrower into the bushes. As if it wasn't enough, when I got to my car and drove back home through the village, in a roadside ditch, I came across a huge old-school TV set, a drawer full of odds and ends, and a plastic relief of the Virgin Mary, whose halo had clearly once glowed thanks to yellow diodes. So instead of kissing, I got a kick in the ass and electronic waste. Of course, całowanie, kissing, is not a lonely and forgotten place at all. Sometimes, on warm Saturdays and Sundays, the road leading through the marsh is blocked by cars. Families with children and bird watchers come here, whose hobby is linked to the rhythm of bird migrations. They watch curlews, black-tailed godwits, corncrakes, and marsh harriers. They use the observation tower and the footbridge thrown over the marsh. To the south, it zigzags through the peat bog. To the north, it crosses a dark alder forest with a large puddle. Above the latter, you can't help but notice two pyramids built of branches. They resemble castles on the water, just like the Narva and Ivanogrod on the opposite banks of the Border River somewhere in the Far East. Thanks to them, beavers are kind of a given in całowanie. However, I needed to meet with activists fighting for beaver welfare there to fully understand the scale of this beaverville. So please allow me to tell you about the work I'm doing here in the hospitable premises of Jan Michalski Foundation, because it's my sixth book, and I consider it I think the most important one, the one that I dreamt of writing for some time now. I started writing before 2020, so it's been like 5 years now. And I would say that the book is about the Baltic Sea with a working title, The Pharonauts. Pharo is in the lighthouse, and nauts like astronauts, so the discoverers of the unknown. It's the term I made up myself, but I think it fits. So the book came out of this dream of a child, probably, because it seems I share the same vision with this German writer you all know, called Thomas Mann. It's good to have something in common with a Nobel Prize winner. So in his memoirs, he wrote that the Baltic Sea, standing on the beach of the Baltic Sea, either on the German island of Hiddensee or Il Travemünde near Lübeck, so that going there in childhood and standing on the beach, looking just at the horizon, it was one of the forming experiences for him. It was very important, and he went through this memories all year long and waited when we'll be able to come back to the seaside and to see the horizon again. He spent every summer there. When he was an adult, he bought a summer house in Nida, in present-day Lithuania, and he worked there as long as the history allowed him to, because then he had to escape to the west. So when I was a child, I also spent my every summer holiday on the beach at the Baltic Sea in Poland, looking at the horizon and wondering what's there. And you know what my parents would reply? Sweden's there. Yeah, but what is this Sweden? How does it look like? How far is it? Can I see it? If I climb a tree, will it be there? If I climb the lighthouse, will I see this Sweden? And you have to know that I was born in 1982, so it was the 80s and then the 90s. It was a time where a lot of things changed in my homeland, and people still remembered that Baltic could be the escape route from the communist Poland, and some of them tried to row through the Baltic Sea to Sweden to find more freedoms there. And there was even this one story about two brothers who hid under the truck and managed to escape to Sweden. And they even made a film about them. It was called 300 Miles to Heaven. So I learned that it's much closer to Sweden than 300 miles. Actually, it's about 100 miles. And I also learned that Sweden is far from heaven. So yeah, as an author of a couple of books, I told my publisher that I would like to go back to this memory from my childhood, and I would like to ask myself again, what's behind the horizon? But I would not be satisfied with the simple answer that it's Sweden. I spent 5 years traveling around the Baltic Sea because there are 9 Baltic countries. It's Poland, it's Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Russia, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany. So I've been to all of them except for Russia, because first the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and then Russia invaded Ukraine. So I don't have guts to go to Russia right now. I'll try to find a way out of it, but I think I have some ideas how to write about Russia without going to Russia. So yeah, I've been traveling through those countries and going to the seaside and standing on the beach and looking at the horizon and wondering what do they see? What questions do they ask about the sea? What's their perspective on the sea? Because as another Nobel Prize winner, Thomas Tranströmer, one of his books of poems was titled the Baltic seas, as in plural, seas. So that was my goal was to see if it's true, if there are multiple Baltic seas, or do we see the same thing. And so I started, in my head, I started turning the map again, like this one, but this time the map of the Baltic Sea, and imagining how the sea would look from the perspective of each country. So it's even funny because for the Germans, Baltic Sea is called Ostsee, which means the Eastern Sea. And from Estonians, the Estonians call it Läänemeri, which is the Western Sea. And the Finns call it Itämeri, which means the Eastern Sea again. And it's funny because for them, the sea lies in the north, in the south, in the west, but everywhere but the east. But they still call it the Eastern Sea. For us, the Poles, when we talk about the Baltic state, the Baltic states, the Baltic Sea, we think primarily of the north, because wherever we look in Poland, we look north to see the sea. So even the directions, the names related to directions tell us that the stories of the sea might be different in each of the countries. We Poles are not a maritime nation. We are not a nation of sailors. I believe that we see the Baltic as just kind of a backdrop to our vacation, nothing more. We are not interested in biology of the sea. We are afraid of it. So yeah, it's a place we go to on a vacation and ask strange questions about Sweden. So I wanted to find what other nations think about it, and because apart from waves and the coastline, I believe that you can see something different from the shore. So imagine that the Lithuanian coast is an amazing corridor for migrating birds. They use the parts of the land that border the sea and fly in masses in spring and then return south in autumn. I spend a lot of time with ornithologists there, watching the birds and counting them, trapping them, putting those rings on them, and wondering why do birds migrate? How do they do it? Which routes do they take? Are they fixed routes or do they change them? In Latvia, I learned something really surprising. Imagine that Latvia is for werewolves what Transylvania is for vampires. So werewolves are a very big thing in Latvia. It's a homeland of werewolves, and a lot of national mythology draws from the Baltic Sea. There are stories of monsters, and sometimes there is something interesting in them because they have a lot to do with dealing with the occupants, the Prussian occupants, the Crusaders. So perhaps they were seen as monsters for the folk of Latvia. Estonia is a truly maritime island country with a lot of lighthouses. The oldest lighthouse in this part of the world is this tower still standing on the island of Huma in Estonia. And Estonians are, we in Poland just always put them in this line with Lithuanians and Latvians. So we treat these three countries as a whole, but it's not right. The Estonians are a Scandinavian nation. They are this small Scandinavian country bordering Latvia and Russia. And you can easily tell them that they have this Scandinavian point of view on everything. They are quiet. They are deeply concerned in nature. They had these huge bonfires on Midsummer, on summer solstice. And they love building towers. They build lighthouses and towers. They have even this imitation of the Eiffel Tower built from wood. I think it wouldn't be allowed to build anywhere in Central Europe. because I believe it's dangerous. It just goes like this in the wind because it's wooden. One guy built it, and it's almost as high as a lighthouse. Yeah, but I climbed it anyway. So then I went to Finland, and in Finland I had an opportunity to walk on the frozen sea. It's something that happens not that often, that you can walk on the frozen sea, but yeah, the Baltic Sea in the north, in the Bothnia Bay, it still freezes. But was also surprising for me that somewhere in Europe people still see kind of synchronicity in landscape, because I believe our culture, I mean, for us in Central Europe, in Western Europe, saints are people, buildings can be saint, books, there are laws can be saint, even the remains of humans, of Christian saints, their body parts are considered saint. But we don't see the landscape, something that we don't, parts of the natural world, something that we didn't create, we don't consider it saint. But some people in Finland still do. Sometimes they'll still worship stones or trees or lakes, this parts of nature as being just purely saint. And this is an amazing thing that nowadays there is this pagan religion still in Europe happening. Sweden, the country I dreamed of as a child, surprised me as well, because I went to the so-called high coast of Sweden. It's a place where the sea meets the mountains, and they are pretty high, not as high as the Swiss Jura or the Alps, but they are pretty high. They are like 700, 800 meters tall. When you put that close to the sea, it's high. And what is interesting is that Sweden still grows, because the ice sheet that retreated 10,000 years ago, right now the land bounces off, so it still grows higher. And I was walking through the mountains, and I realized that myself, I stopped growing. I mean, I'm 1 meter 80 centimeters, something like that, and I stopped growing like 20 years ago. But Sweden still grows, so Sweden is getting bigger. I'm not, and it's quite fast, because it's 9 or 10 millimeters per year. So imagine that when you build a bridge, you have to consider the fact that the country is still bouncing off after the glaciation. Yeah, so then I went to Denmark, and in Denmark I discovered that if you're there, wherever you are by the sea, because they have two seas. They have the Baltic Sea and the Northern Sea. They are the land of straits. So there's this labyrinth of water that they use for almost everything. And it's also an oasis for marine life. And imagine my surprise when I found out that tunas are swimming through the straits of Denmark, to the Baltic Sea, the big tunas that we all eat in our pasta. And the tunas are followed by the predatory killer whales. So imagine my surprise when I realized that standing on this boring Polish coast, on this boring Polish beach a couple of years ago, I would never have guessed that I would end up writing about the orcas, the killer whales. And that made me believe that this book might be worthwhile, because every chapter, every story will bring such surprises to myself and perhaps to the reader. So yes, I'm really looking forward to finishing this book, and I'm doing it here, writing in one of the cabins as a resident of the foundation. And I'm really glad I can do it, surrounded by such wonderful landscapes that remind me of this landscape, of my homeland mountains of Bieszczady the hills, the forests, the animals, the birds, the wolves. Yes, and that's it from me. Thank you very much. I would gladly talk to any of you upstairs because there's wine waiting. I don't speak French, but we can talk in English or Polish if anyone speaks Polish. Thank you very much.